Hello there and welcome to another episode of Dream Deals, the programme that tells you everything you ever needed to know about your favourite car maker and gives you helpful, real-world advice on how to get your hands on your very own dream deal. This week we're looking at a car manufacturer with a history of innovation and groundbreaking design, as well as a solid background in motorsport. Yes, it's those terrific Teutonic technicians, Audi. Founded in 1899 by August Horsch and originally called Horsch, the Audi name came about in 1910. The Horsch name was already registered, so August's son had the bright idea of translating the name into Latin, and the Audi name was born. Working from a converted stable, the company's reputation for innovation was already taking shape, with Horsch developing a vibrationless engine and the first shaft-driven engine in the world. The company's distinctive four-ring emblem came about in 1932 when four brands, Audi, DKW, Horsch and Wanderer, came together to form the Auto Union. Now, the Auto Union had some sporting tradition. During the 1930s, its Silver Arrows racing cars dominated the world's racing circuits. Audi's technological advancements continued to shine as part of the Auto Union, developing the world's first left-hand drive and centre gear stick, and also the world's first four-wheel braking system. The 1950s were a tough time economically for the company. It was first bought by Daimler-Benz and then sold to Volkswagen, heralding the start of the modern era for Audi. It marked the occasion by introducing its first four-stroke engine in their first all-new car. That first car, simply called Audi, was a front-wheel drive 1.7 litre four-cylinder engine, developing 72 brake horsepower. Now, the car's initial success meant that it was quickly followed by a range of engine and body styles, including 2- and 4-door saloons and a 3-door estate, simply called Variant. Now, this combination of a four-cylinder engine and front-wheel drive proved to be so popular and essentially so good that it remained largely unchanged for many, many years. When Volkswagen purchased Auto Union, their plan was to utilise the factory capacity in Ingolstadt to produce Volkswagen models rather than to promote Audi as a strong individual car maker. But developing a level of determination that would come to characterise Audi's, and some would say most German cars, the engineers had their own ideas and put the 100 project into development secretly. Now, VW at the time were producing rear-mounted air-cooled engines, but they still saw the potential of the front-engined car and allowed the car to go into production. Following the success of the 100, Audi were given more freedom to develop cars as a unique brand. VW, however, were quick to take over the new concepts and even the whole cars and make them their own, showing the high regard with which Audi was now being held. Now, with some of the cars we feature on Dream Deals, it's perhaps a stretch of the imagination to say that they kept us awake at night. But the next car, for me anyway, it's a bona fide dream deal. 20 years ago, I used to lie awake thinking about the Audi Quattro Coupe. Now, there are still some of those cars available, so here's a buyer's guide on how to get your hands on your own dream deal.
The UR is without doubt one of the most desirable rally-inspired performance cars ever made. But with such high popularity comes high second-hand values. For example, we've seen a 1984 model that will still cost you £6,000. But if you're willing to do a little work, how does a 1983 model without a driver's seat sound for £2,500?
Paid just under 15,000 for it 15 years ago. Now it'd be hard to put a price on it. It's like anything, it depends on what someone would be prepared to offer me on it. But a similar model of a similar age probably fetch around 5,000 to 6,000. It's not so much troublesome. They're quite sturdily built. They last a long time. Gearbox is strong, engines is strong. Parts do tend to be quite expensive, but if it's well looked after, you don't need to buy too many parts.
If you should get a little carried away and discover that you're the next Richard Burns, what's it going to cost to put your UR back on the road? Well, the good news is not a great deal. For example, a new fiberglass tailgate and spoiler can be yours for a little over £100, whilst a central locking pump would be a snip at £25.
Now this turbocharged four-wheel drive coupe was obviously a specialist vehicle, but there was a cheaper, less powerful alternative. The Series 3 coupe had a lot of the looks of the Quattro, and there's a lot more of those around, so here's a buyer's guide.
The Series 3 was a much more rounded and softer version than the original Quattro. Performance wasn't as spectacular, and as a result, used models aren't as sought after, although it's still a pretty good car. And the good news is that there are plenty of models around. For example, we've seen a 1990 2.3 Quattro for £2,500 and a 2.8 V6 for just under £4,000.
Paid just under £2,500 for it. It's worth maybe a little bit more than that because standard road cars go for that. I've done full brakes on it since buying it and a few electrical jobs on it. It's totally modified, it's not a standard car. It's got a roll cage, fire system in it, seats and harnesses. It's a superb vehicle for tarmac road rallying and stage rallying. It's well set up, permanent four-wheel drive. The suspension's solid and stiff like a go-kart, and it really performs well.
Now in terms of repairs and running costs, the coupe is pretty good. If the car's been well looked after, then it should run and run with only the usual maintenance work needed. A set of spark plugs will only cost £16, whilst a cam belt will set you back about £18.
For many years, unbeknownst to the rest of the car industry, Audi had been working in conjunction with the Aluminium Company of America, developing a new lightweight aluminium production car, and in 1993 unveiled the space frame that was to shape the future of the company. Then the following year at the Geneva Motor Show, they unveiled the A8. Along with being the company's new flagship model, it was, more importantly, the world's first all-aluminium production car. In terms of style, the A8 wasn't exactly groundbreaking, although it did still look the part. While its rather large dimensions were disguised with nice smooth curves, it still had a powerful stance. It certainly wouldn't have looked out of place in the director's car park, although it still wasn't a BMW. Now, although this beautiful A8 has just been replaced by an all-new model, the new car still relies on much of the original technology. Now, it is a shame you can't see more of the aluminium. Well, you can see the aluminium, it's been painted. No, all you get is this one poxy little badge to tell you about the space frame. Following the A8 in 1996, Audi launched the A3, a car for middle-class families everywhere. A car that was not only sensible, but also respectable. Now, being practical and having enough room in your boot for 6'3" and nearly £200 of finest Mancunian beef is all fine and dandy. But what happens when you want to have some fun? Well, thankfully, Audi didn't suggest a trip to the local theme park. They built this, the superb S3, a car that would have solicitors up and down the country reaching for their checkbooks faster than you or I could get compensation. Oh. 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 Underneath the car's rather dull exterior was a 1.8 litre engine producing 225 brake horsepower. Performance, as you would expect, was brisk. 60 came up in around 6.5 seconds, while the car's top speed was 151 miles per hour. And of course, underpinning the car was the company's now famous Quattro four-wheel drive system. Visually, the S3 didn't follow in the hot hatch tradition. There were no brash bonnet vents or over-the-top spoilers. Instead, it's all very sophisticated. And by the way, the engine under here would become the engine of choice for the majority of all high-performance cars from the VW Audi family. Some people have criticised the S3 for being too sensible. Quick it was, but fun it probably wasn't. Having said that, answer me this. What performance hatch at the time offered blistering performance, four-wheel drive security, great build quality and superb residuals? Answer, not very many. You see, being a dream deal isn't just about being fast or sexy, it's about the whole package. Need I say more? Well, that's it for part one of the show, but do stick with us because coming up in part two, I'll be getting my hands on some more contemporary Audi classics, including the legendary TT and the quirky A2. We'll see you in a couple of minutes. Hello and welcome back to part two of Dream Deals. On tonight's show, we're taking a look at a car maker that not only makes great everyday cars for everyday use, but also some blistering performance cars too. Who? It's Audi, of course. Throughout their history, one of the criticisms that has often been thrown at the Audi is that although the cars were solid and often quick, they weren't exactly the most stylish things on four wheels. By the end of the 90s, however, this was all about to change. The revolution started with this, the now legendary TT, a car that captured people's imaginations, and they were shifting that fast, people couldn't get their money out quick enough. At its launch, the TT was available with a 1.8 litre engine that offered two different power outputs. There was the 180 brake horsepower unit, which was capable of 0 to 60 in just under 8 seconds, but the real performance came from the 225 brake unit, which would get the TT to 60 in just over 6 seconds. Now, it's difficult to say sometimes what constitutes a work of art. One man's Jacksons can be another man's Pollocks. For me, there's no debate, the TT belongs in a museum of modern art. The car manages to not only combine Audi's robust urban image with sexy curvy lines, and unlike many of today's cars, the TT looks just as great on the inside. Since its launch, competition for the TT has become even tougher, so much so that this year the company unveiled two new models, a 150 brake horsepower TT that does away with the four-wheel drive, and a 3.2 V6 with 250 brake. For me, the TT is a hugely significant car in Audi's history. It looks fantastic, and it's sold by the bucket load. But the real significance lay in the fact that the car made the marque desirable once more, just like the original Quattro did 20 years earlier. The only question remaining, could they keep it up? Well, the answer is yes and no. Following on from the styling success of the TT, Audi unveiled this, the A2. A car that might not be a dream for many, but it is a car that will certainly be remembered. Where the TT was undeniably sexy, you'd be hard-pressed to find anything on the A2 that makes you go weak at the knees. OK, so the car's designers have tried to produce a modern and stylistic interpretation of the small family hatch. The only problem is that it isn't exactly cool. But let's face it, the A2 was never going to be a huge hit. It looks terrible. But what it did do, once again, was demonstrate the company's technological prowess. But if you want a car that makes a statement, you could do a lot worse than the A2. As for a dream deal, you might need to look elsewhere. Now, with Audi's A6 Allroad, they've put their four-wheel drive system to a very different use. Here's a buyer's guide.
The A6 Allroad might not be everyone's dream, but trust me when I say that if you're looking for a powerful estate car with off-road capabilities, then you should look no further. At new, you would have expected to pay the best part of 30 grand for a new model. The bad news is that because the car was only introduced a few years ago, there are limited numbers of second-hand models around, and those aren't cheap. We've seen a W-Reg 2.7 Quattro with 30,000 miles on the clock for 24,000, and an X-Reg TDI with 52,000 miles for 22,000.
It is an unusual car, but it's perhaps that's part of the attraction to it. There's not many of them around, and it's a practical estate car, and it's also got air adjustable suspension, which gives it some off-road capability. With it being a big car, an unusual car, I think the value will hold. There's not too many of them around, and second-hand value, I think, will stay.
One of the problems in my job is constantly driving around in cars that just aren't me. You see, today's dream deal is a great example of that. I don't want anyone who sees me in it to think that the car's mine. It might seem odd. See, the car I'm driving today is fast, stylish, incredibly well made, but it just isn't me. Don't get me wrong, I love to pose in the right car, and sadly, this isn't it. This beautiful Audi A4 Convertible is more for Hoorah Henrys and Sarah Janes in Kensington than for Brendan and Bob in Wigan and Bolton. It's a kind of inverted snobbery. I don't want people to think I'm in property. I want people to think I'm cool. Well, the car itself, of course, there's nothing wrong with it. It's got definite TT styling cues with low aggressive skirts at the front and on the side, with panels that blend perfectly with the lines along the side. The side elevation, well, that's the best view of this car. Unusually for a convertible, it looks just as good with the roof up as it does with the roof down. Beautifully proportioned and sexy, it'd be a match on the catwalk for any of the topless cars in its class. Some cars are made to look aggressive, some give the impression of speed, even if they don't deliver. Well, this car just oozes sexy boutique chic, and that's the problem. I don't do sexy boutique chic. In fact, it's hard to think of a car that says overweight, slow and thick. When people see me in this car, they just think I've borrowed it from my mum or my sister. Anyway, enough of my chips on my shoulder. How does the car drive? There is an old analogy that convertible cars are like a proverbial biscuit tin, only without the lid. The lid gives the whole box rigidity. Well, the chassis of the old A4 Convertible was like a plate of blancmange, only not as stiff. But Audi have been very busy in the 10 or 11 years since that previous car was launched, because this car has got 21st century technology, giving it loads of rigidity and a chassis to match the huge 220 brake horsepower engine. And that 220 brake horsepower engine is a cracker. Power comes from a 3-litre V6 30-valve engine, which gets this rather heavy beast from 0 to 60 in under 8 seconds, on to a top speed on a de-restricted autobahn, of course, of 150 miles per hour. Now, there is a less powerful 2.4-litre engine in the range, and, would you believe it, a turbo diesel version. Can you imagine driving a convertible like this that's a diesel? The world is going mad. Now, the engine note on this car isn't anywhere near as throaty as, say, the equivalent 3-litre 3 Series BMW Coupe convertible, but that's a straight 6. And anyway, this car is made for cruising rather than bruising, and the drive isn't as engaging or as fun as that rear-wheel drive BMW, but the front drive on this Audi is predictably sure-footed and handles well, and it does just enough to keep a smile on your face. Now, the automatic 6-speed gearbox on this car is quite frankly remarkable. I can't detect when it's changing gear. There is a semi-automatic option if you want to actually pin it down in gears, and for hard driving that's what you should use, but for cruising around, let the gearbox do its work. It's really, I don't know, it's got an extra cog for each gear or something like that, and it's conical so that it's almost seamless changes. But the only time I can tell that it's changing gear is when my rev counter goes down. You think, oh, yeah, it changed gear then. It's incredible. Now, Audi claim that this is a genuine 4-seater, but one glance in the back tells you that that's clearly a huge pile of steaming horse manure. There's room in there for a couple of teenagers at best, but it is worth having. Just don't expect to get Joe Brand in there for anything other than a short journey. Probably the cake shop and back. The ride and suspension of this car is perfectly placed for the kind of car it is. Any harder and you wouldn't have that lovely cruisy feeling that this car gives you, and any softer and you'd be back to where the old car was. No, this car's just right for those days in the country of topless driving. And by that I mean roof down, not, you know, with your bits out. Think you know what I mean? But back to where I started. This car just isn't as cool as, say, the BMW 3 Series convertible. And this car, cliche but true, and I'm sorry to say it, it is a bit of a ladies' car. But it is sexy, stylish and good fun to drive. So just sit back, enjoy it and forget what people are saying about you. I'll see you back in Chelsea. You ain't seen me, right? With cars like the TT and the A2, Audi have in many ways stayed ahead of the game, but one market that they still trail is in the SUV market. But that might be about to change. They've just unveiled the Pikes Peak 4x4 concept, and the company hope to crash the party. With a history so steeped in four-wheel drive technology, it was inevitable that sooner or later Audi would unveil a car that would redefine the SUV market. Named after the famous Pikes Peak mountain in Colorado, this has the power and technology to go anywhere. Underneath its aggressive meshed bonnet is a tuned version of the RS6's 4.2-litre twin-turbocharged V8. Power has been increased from 350 to 500 brake horsepower, meaning that the Pikes Peak can hit 60 in under 5 seconds. But don't go thinking that the Pikes Peak is all show, because the car's designers have made sure that it can tackle more than just the school run. Standard torque is split between the two axles 50-50, but if you do get into a spin, power is automatically shifted to the axle with the most grip. Holding everything together is the latest version of the company's highly successful Quattro four-wheel drive system. And should you still find yourself in need of some extra help, the Pikes Peak also comes with variable height active suspension, which can raise the car an extra 11 inches. But let's be realistic, cars like the Pikes Peak are often seen more on the high street than on the high peaks. So with this in mind, it comes fully loaded with all the latest equipment, including 6 forward-facing bucket seats, DVD and internet access. Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for this week, but join us at the same time next week when I'll be searching out some more dream deals. We'll see you then.